Turn in your Bibles, if you will, during the brief time that we have available at this hour, to the Hebrew letter and the 10th chapter. Hebrews chapter 10, and we will begin in verse 35 and go through the end of the chapter. Hebrews chapter 10, beginning in verse 35. Therefore, he says, a concluding statement, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith to the preserving of the soul. Ladies and gentlemen, life is hard. And there are some days in which it just gets harder. And the easiest response from all of us to those threatening moments that come in our lives, the easiest response in all of us is to simply shrink back, is to run away, is to panic, is to just take our faith and just chuck it. And that's the one thing that he says you cannot do. He says we are not those who shrink back to destruction, but we are to be those who have faith to the preserving of our souls. If your faith doesn't count in hard times, if your faith doesn't count in harder times, then your faith doesn't count at all. And that's the message of the passage we just read. I would like to tell you that faith just comes so easy for me. I would like to tell you that I always have an unwavering confidence in God. I would like to tell you that I always just trust and I always pray and I just never worry about anything. I would like to tell you that, but that would be a lie. Because sometimes my faith gets sort of weak and weary. Sometimes my faith isn't what it ought to be. I think I'm that dad in Mark chapter 9 and verse 24 when he talked with Jesus and he said to Jesus, Lord, I believe. And then in the same sentence he says, but help my unbelief. I think I've been there. And like the apostles in Luke 17 and verse 5, they turned to Jesus and they said, Lord, increase our faith. Or Matthew chapter 8 and verse 26, when Jesus said to them, O ye of little faith. Somebody asked me one time, how do you preachers know what to preach about? Well, I can't answer that question for anybody else, but I can answer it for me. Because I've learned over time that I need to just get up and talk about the stuff I need. Because the stuff I need, the same thing everybody else needs too. And what I need is more faith. In fact, I don't know anybody who doesn't need more faith. I don't know anybody, and I don't care how long you've been a Christian. I don't know anybody who doesn't need a deeper conviction in the things of God. We all do. So let's quit pretending like we have all the answers all the time about everything. Let's quit pretending like we have it all together. Let's quit pretending like we never worry, we never question, we never have doubt. Because I'll tell you what that is. That's phony. I don't know anybody who hasn't at one time or the other struggled with this thing called faith. But I will tell you this, you're going to need it. Because life is hard. And some days it gets harder. So what is this thing called faith? We talk about it all the time. We preach about it. We read verses about it. We sing about it as we have just done. What is it? Well, we understand that faith is necessary to save. We get that. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 8, for by grace are you saved, that's God's part, through faith, that's your part. Or John 3 and verse 16, we know exactly what that says. Or Mark 16 and verse 16, he that believeth, there's faith, and is baptized, which by the way is an action of faith, will be saved. So we understand that faith is necessary to save us. But I will tell you this, and this is the whole purpose of this series of lessons on faith this week. Faith is not only necessary to save your soul, faith is necessary to get you through the day-to-day stuff that you're going to face. There's going to be times in your life when circumstances are going to knock you to the floor. Things are going to happen in your life that you did not see coming. And what are you going to do then? You're going to fall apart? Or are you going to have faith? How would you complete the sentence? If I were to write this sentence, and the sentence says, faith is blank, and you had to come up with a one-word definition, what word would you put in that blank? Faith is blank. Well, I think I would put the word trust there, because essentially that's what faith is. It is trusting God to handle me in the troublesome times that come into my life. Times I may not understand. I may be like Job, and I may raise the question again and again, why, and why me, and why this, and why now? Because I don't understand God, and I don't understand God's timing, and I sometimes don't understand what lessons He's wanting me to learn. But I have to trust Him. And there may be some ends out there that I may not be able to see, like the Joseph of the Old Testament. But I have to trust Him, even though I don't always understand. Faith is trusting God to get me through the maze of life's problems and difficulties. Faith is trusting Him to help me to get a handle on temptation, or to get me through the trials of life, whatever they are. Faith is trusting Him to get me to my forever home, to get me from this temporary place to my eternal place. I tell you, when you learn about trust, you learn about trust when you get on an airplane. Did you know that? That's when you learn about trust. I got to the airport yesterday morning in Nashville. I had everything just planned out. I'm a 2-hour early airport guy. That means I like to get there early, get checked in, go have breakfast, drink 14 cups of coffee, study, read, just relax. It's just something about it when you finally can get through security and just sit down. It's great. I had it all planned out. And I check in there at the Southwest counter, and first thing that pops up on the little kiosk, it says, flight canceled, see attendant. So I saw the attendant, and she said, your flight's canceled. I said, well, that's what that says. She says, you're going to Dallas. I said, yes, ma'am. Well, she said, let me see if I can get you on the early flight. And she said, it leaves in 30 minutes. I said, I don't think I can make it. She said, I have faith that you can. So she puts me on that flight. I get through security. I have not had breakfast. I like to also be in the A or the B group. Those of you who fly that airline, you know how that works. I was C-27, which meant I sat in the back row between two big guys like this all the way to Dallas. Now, we start landing in Dallas, and he comes on the intercom and he says, ladies and gentlemen, there's weather in Dallas. We're going to have to circle a while. So we're going round and round and round Dallas and round and round. Finally, he comes on and says, we've got a slight problem. Said, we can't stay up here all day without gas. So we're going to take a right turn and we're going to take you to Tulsa because they have gas there and they don't have weather there. So we went to Tulsa, got gas, and then flew back from Tulsa back to Dallas, and it was one of these kind of fun rides that you pay a lot of extra money for if you like roller coasters. You ever walk on a plane and ask to see the pilot's license? Nobody does that. We get on the airplane because we have faith that this pilot is qualified, that he's been trained, that he's gone through all kind of simulator exercises, that he's spent time in the cockpit, or she, whatever the case may be, and that they're qualified to fly the aircraft. We have faith in the principles of physics and aerodynamics, that this plane is flight worthy. We have faith in ATC, the air traffic control system, that they're going to keep our planes separated and keep us all safe. And so we have faith in all of those areas. Now somebody says, can you say with 100% accuracy the plane cannot crash? No, I can't say that. I could argue mathematically and statistically that the greatest danger you're on your trip is not in the airplane, it's on the freeway to the airport. But I have a decision to make. Either I get on the airplane or I don't. And I can't sit there and go, I think 75% of me is going to get on. But the other 25 I'm going to leave behind. It doesn't work that way. If you're going to get on the airplane, 100% of you has to get on board. And do you know that's exactly what God is saying to you and to me? I want your 100% commitment, even in the face of things you may not understand or may not be able to answer or may not know. I want your 100% commitment, all to Jesus. I surrender. I surrender all. That's the core. That's the core of faith. And ladies and gentlemen, our faith has to be practical. It's got to be down here where we can all live it every day, because we don't live here. It's easy to come in here and sing about it and preach about it and talk about it and hear about it, but we don't live here, we live out there. And we've got to be able to take what we learn in here and take it with us out there so that it becomes alive and it becomes real in real time. Because life is hard. And some days it gets harder. What a great song that we sang. We walk by faith and not by sight. And that comes right out of 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7. And yet, that is so easy to say and so hard to do, because we tend to be so sight-oriented. It becomes very difficult for us to embrace this dimension of faith if we can touch it, if we can see it. But what if we can't? And so I can't sleep and I can't relax and I can worry, I can do that. But worry is the opposite of faith. And maybe at those times, that's when God really does His work on me. When I have no place to go but up, when I have nowhere else to turn but Him, that's when I start learning about faith. Because if your faith doesn't count in the hard and harder times, your faith doesn't count at all. So I'm going to leave you this morning. I'm going to leave you with 6 things about faith, because if you come into the next chapter of Hebrews, chapter 11, beginning in verse 1, these 6 truths about faith are right in the text. They are just right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 truths about faith that you have to embrace. Number 1, he says in verse 1, Hebrews 11 and verse 1, faith requires assurance and conviction. Do you see that? Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. The word assurance means to stand under something so that it is supported. It was originally used of something like a title deed to a piece of property. Somebody questions your ownership of a piece of property, you show them the title deed. And that title deed stands under you. That is, it supports your claim of ownership. The old King James Version, I like it. It says, faith is the substance of hope. The word substance can be divided. There's the suffix stance, which means to stand, and the prefix sub, which means under. And what he's saying is, your faith is the thing that will stand under you when everything else falls apart. Your faith will support you. It'll give you the strength to go on. And it will give you the assurance of your hope and the courage to take it another day. And then he says, is the conviction of things not seen. What is conviction? Well, it's proof, it's evidence. How does that relate to faith? It is living proof that God is going to take care of me, that God is going to take care of my family, that God is going to take care of my situation, no matter what it is. It is being convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that God is in charge, not me, and that God can handle it, and that God is able to pull this off. Real faith, ladies and gentlemen, Bible faith is not some kind of flimsy, emotional, up and down kind of thing. Look at the words. You talk about strong words. Assurance, conviction, evidence, substance. That doesn't mean God's going to just, if I have faith, God's going to eliminate all the hardship. It means He's going to help me get through this. And He's going to be with me every step of the way. Faith involves assurance and conviction. Secondly, faith points to the future. Do you see that in verse 1? Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. Which direction does hope point? Hope points toward the future. Now, the problem is our worries tend to point in the same direction. We worry about tomorrow. We worry about down the road. We worry about, well, what if this happens and what if that happens? And we conjure up all of these imaginary what ifs, most of which are not going to happen. But that doesn't keep us from worrying about it. What if my marriage struggles? What if I raise my kids and they begin to turn against the very things that I've tried to teach them? What if I get cancer? What if this or that? Now, why do we worry about these kinds of things? Because we want to be in control. And what you soon learn as you go through life is you're not in control. In fact, you don't control much of anything. But I'll tell you this, God says to us, in essence, if your marriage struggles, I'm not going anywhere. If your kids turn away from the principles that I've laid out for them, I'll be there with you. If you go to cancer, I will go too. We'll go through the treatments together. We'll go through the side effects together. If you flip the page in Hebrews to chapter 13 and verse 5, he gives this promise, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. The word never is a big word. And I will say God is the only one who's qualified to use it. Never. Faith points to the future. Third, faith involves the unseen. The conviction or evidence of things not seen. That's the hard part. We want to be able to see it. We want to be able to know all the answers. We want to be able to say, okay, God, where are you leading me? I need to know all of this in advance. And so given the choice between walking by faith and walking by sight, well, we're kind of like Thomas. Unless I see in his hand the imprint of the nails and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. I have to see it to believe it, he said. And remember the words of Jesus? Because you have seen, do you believe? Blessed are those who haven't seen. And that's you and me. And yet believe. J. Oswald Sanders, in his book on leadership, talks about faith as it relates to leaders. And he made this observation. He said, no pessimist ever made a great leader. Because the pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, while the optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So we all have a choice to make. And that choice is either I'm going to be an optimist or I'm going to be a pessimist. Now, let's put that in biblical terms. Either I choose to walk by faith or I choose to be Thomas-like and say, unless I see it, understand it, can answer all the questions, I will not believe. And as you go through the text of Scripture from beginning to end, all of the great people that God used became men and women of faith. I think of Joshua in the Old Testament, and Caleb, and I think of Joseph, and I think of both Josephs, the Old Testament Joseph and the New Testament one. And I think of David and Daniel and Esther and Ruth and Mary and Paul, and I think about all these people. And they were all characterized by one thing. They grew in their faith to the point that they didn't have to see it to believe. No pessimist ever made a great leader. No pessimist ever understood Bible faith either. And then he says, number 4, faith is basic to pleasing God. Faith is basic to pleasing God. That's in verse 2. For by it the men of old gained approval. And he starts here and he gives example after example after example of people who were just like you and me, who started out with little and ended up with great blessing because simply they put their confidence in God. And even God goes back, verse 3, to a time when there was nothing, and He set the precedent by creating the visible out of the invisible. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of the things that are visible. God made something when there was nothing. So I don't understand. I've got a disconnect. I'm trying to put this puzzle together of what you're talking about. How does this relate to where I am now? Okay, here it is. If God can do that with the creation of the world, if God can operate in the area of the unseen, if God could make something when there was nothing, can He not take you? Can He not take your situation and on the basis of your faith make something out of what you think is an impossible situation? But Lord, I don't know where this is going. I don't see any way you can possibly make something good come out. And God says, wait. I'm the creator of the world. Look around. I made all of this, and I created this out of nothing. You don't think I can handle you? You don't think I can handle your family? You don't think I can handle this situation? And all He says to us is, trust me. Faith. It worked for Abel in verse 4, it worked for Enoch in verse 5, and it will work for you in verse 6. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. He doesn't say improbable. He doesn't say highly unlikely. He says it will be impossible for you to please God. In other words, if you're trying to work your stuff out on the basis of your terms, if you're worrying about all kinds of things that you can't control, God says, wait a minute. I'm not pleased with that. I want you to walk by faith. I want you to trust me. Now, you can't fake it. I've known people who tried to fake it with God. And here's how they do that. Well, faith is so hard for me. I'll study my Bible more and it'll make up for my lack of faith. I'll attend all the services. I'll come to Bible class. Hey, I'll teach a Bible class to little kids. I'll give more money. I'll pray more. I'll show up for a work day. I'll be really, really spiritually busy. It won't work. Because there's no other way. There's no substitute for faith. Your automobile, for example, runs on gasoline, petroleum. It is a fuel designed to produce energy so your car can consume, so it can go. But there's a lot of negatives to it. It pollutes the environment. It's flammable, costs a lot of money. So let's say one morning you're just sick and tired of paying all this money for gas, and so you decided, I'm just going to fill up my tank with water. Makes more sense. It's cheaper. It's not going to blow up. Not going to pollute the environment. There's a lot more of it. So there's a lot of positives about it. There's only one problem. It's not going to work. You can't drive your car when the tank's full of water. And you can't please God when you try to substitute everything else except the one thing you got to have. And that's faith. And I'll tell you what else he says, verse 6, number 5. Faith means we believe God is real. Without faith it is impossible to please God, for he who comes to God must believe that he is. Could someone come to the conclusion that you believe in God and that God is real to you just by watching how you respond to various situations? When you are besieged by hardship, do you fall apart as if God isn't real? Now that doesn't say we don't, that's not to say when life knocks us down to our knees that we don't have our moments and our days. And there's times we take 2 steps forward and fall back 3. I get that. I've been there, done that. You have too. That's not what I'm talking about. But at some point our faith has to rise to the surface. Does your faith rise to the surface? Parents, by the way, it better, because little eyes are watching. And they're watching how we respond. Do we just talk the talk? Or do we walk the talk and walk by faith? And last, he says, faith understands that God rewards the faithful. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. Though King James says to seek him diligently. That's the idea. Real faith doesn't just believe God is real and stops right there. Real faith believes that God somehow, some way, in his own time, God's going to work this out. Is your faith that deep? Lord, I'm tired of wrestling with this. I'm tired of trying to handle this on my own. I'm tired of worrying about this. I'm tired of losing sleep about this. Lord, here. You take it. You handle it. You step into my life because I trust you. Faith understands God rewards the seeker. How much time do I have? 10 minutes? I think I've only got 5 left. Okay. Let me leave you with 2 questions. 2 questions. We take these 6 points about faith that the writer of Hebrews gives us, and it brings 2 questions to my mind. Number 1, write this down. Why is faith so hard for me? Why is faith so hard for me? Now, I will tell you there is an answer, but it is an answer that only you can give. Maybe it is fear. Maybe I'm afraid that God's not going to come through for the likes of me. Maybe it's bitterness. Maybe it is resentment. Maybe it is anger towards another person. Because I will tell you, when that's in your heart, it just squeezes out faith. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's pride. You don't think you need God, that somehow you've been convinced you're in control. You'll find out otherwise. Maybe it is hypocrisy. Maybe you're faking it, and you know that you know you're faking it, and you know that God knows you're faking it. Whatever, there is a reason, and whatever it is, you have to figure that out. And if you look in the mirror and take some inventory, you can probably figure that out. And the second question is, why is it so hard to live a day at a time? Why is it so hard to live a day at a time? We tell people that all the time. Well, you just have to live a day at a time. How? How do I live a day at a time? How do I get through today, much less tomorrow, much less all of the tomorrows that are going to come after tomorrow? How do I do this? Well, somebody says, well, just live a day at a time. Well, how? The psalmist says in Psalm 90 and verse 12, teach us to number our days. It is amazing to me. God gives us chunks of time called years, but He says, I want you to live a day at a time. How? By faith. That's the only way you can. In Matthew the 6th chapter, Jesus said, do not be anxious for tomorrow will take care of itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And so how am I going to get through the trouble of today? By faith. That's the only way. Psalm 118 and verse 24, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. How do I get through today? By faith. It's the only way you can. So we're going to talk about faith this week. And we're going to talk about faith in some very real, practical terms on a level that where all of us live, that we can grab hold of something that I hope will help us. Because, ladies and gentlemen, life is hard, and some days it gets harder. And we better work on this thing called faith. And it starts with understanding what it is. Thank you so much for your kind attention this morning. And I trust that we'll have a good week, and I trust that God will be glorified in all that we do.